Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our series of lectures, ערים, מדברות, Talking Cities. We're happy you joined us here for the 9th lecture of the series. In the previous months, רשות העתיקות, the Israeli Antiquity Authority, has been working on exposing the public to the knowledge and information gathered in our excavations. We're doing this through online lectures open to the public, where archaeologists share the work they have done and discoveries uncovered in different excavations. In this lecture, Avraham Tendler will be discussing the symbols found on the coins from the Bar Kokhba revolt, their connections and memories to the temple and to the Chag Sukot, and to the importance of Sukot to the movement, to the revolt movement. Before we begin, just a few technical information. Everyone's going to be on mute. If you have any questions, please write them down at the bottom in the chat button at the bottom, and we will discuss them either during or at the end of the lecture.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Elisheva. Like she said, I'm Avraham Tendler. I'm an archaeologist in the Israel Antiquities Authority Central District. I've excavated large excavations in Modi'in, where I see some of our participants are from, in Lod, in the area of Rosh Ha'ayin, Kfar Bara, and recently in Tel Yafo. But I decided that as we are in the days between Yom Kippur and Sukot, this time I won't present one of my excavations. Rather, I'd like to share interesting research that I did on the Bar Kokhba coins and their connection to memories of the pilgrimage to the temple, to Sukot. Let's begin. So, in my lecture, I will be taking you to the land of Judea in the era of turmoil, the 2nd century CE. Now, we also have some turmoil due to the virus, but then we're talking about the Bar Kokhba revolt. A few words of background. The Second Temple was destroyed by Rome in the summer of the year 70 CE, following a 4-year war, the first Jewish war against the Romans. With its destruction, the Jews left Jerusalem, and the festive pilgrimages to the temple on the holidays definitely ended. However, life in the villages and farmsteads of Judea continued. In the summer of the year 132, the Jews began another rebellion against Rome and its emperor Hadrian. Just a second. I am having a technical difficulty over here. All right, continuing. That's Hadrian. That's his a statue, a bronze statue of Hadrian from Tel Shalem, most probably from the Roman legionary camp over there. That's one of our protagonists. The rebellion was led by Shimon Ben Kosiba, later on known as Bar Kokhba. We don't have a statue of him, of course, but we do have his autograph on one of the letters that he wrote. And there you see it, Shimon Ben Kosiba, later on known as Bar Kokhba. The rebellion lasted 3.5 years until it was brutally vanquished by Rome. Traditionally, historians have bemoaned the lack of a contemporary historian who would have been so kind as to describe the rebellion for us as Josephus was for the first revolt. Leo Mildenberg, one of the important scholars of the Bar Kokhba revolt coinage, summed up the literary sources bluntly by writing, "There are no reliable accounts of the event." One account of the rebellion that did survive is Sophonius' abridgment of Cassius Dio's description of the rebellion. Sophonius was a monk in the 11th century, and he abridged remnants of the Roman historian Cassius Dio's writings from the second half of the 2nd century CE. So that's what we see over here, and I'll paraphrase it because it's important for anyone who's not familiar with it. It's good to know. At Jerusalem, he, that's Hadrian, founded a city in place of the one which had been razed to the ground, naming it Ilia Capitolina. And on the site of the temple of God, the Beit-Hamikdash, he raised a new temple to Jupiter. That hurt. This brought on a war of no slight importance, nor of brief duration. To be sure, they did not dare to try conclusions with the Romans in the open field, but they occupied the advantaged positions in the country and strengthened them with mines and walls in order that they may have places of refuge wherever they should be hard pressed and might meet together unobserved underground, and they pierced these subterranean passages from above at intervals to let in air and light. Just about the founding of Aelia Capitolina, that's a coin that commemorates that founding of Aelia Capitolina. And of course, when he talks about mines, he's talking about the tunnel systems that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. Here's just one picture of many of myself in one of those tunnel systems from the Bar Kokhba Revo. At first, the Romans took no account of them. Soon, however, all Judea had stirred up, and the Jews everywhere were showing signs of disturbance, were gathering together and giving evidence of great hostility to the Romans, partly by secret and partly by overt acts. Then indeed, Hadrian sent against them his best generals. First of these was Julius Severus, who was dispatched from Britain where he was governor against the Jews. Severus did not venture to attack his opponents in the open at any one point, in view of their numbers and their desperation. They were a formidable opponent, the Jews. But by intercepting small groups, thanks to the numbers of his soldiers and his under-officers, and by depriving them of food and shutting them up, he was able rather slowly, to be sure, but with comparatively little danger, to crush, exhaust, and exterminate them. Very few of them, in fact, survived. 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus, nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate. Many Romans, moreover, perished in this war. Therefore, Hadrian, in writing to the Senate, did not employ the opening phrase commonly affected by the emperors, "If you and our children are in health, it is well. I and legions are in health." So that's the description of Cassius Dio. In the void left by the lack of literary evidence, there's in great importance for the archaeological finds, amongst them the numismatic finds, the coins, and the epigraphic finds, the letters sent to or from Shimon Bar Kokhba's command. Much of the crucial information about the rebellion was learned from the coins. For example, the year the rebellion broke out, the fact that the rebellion broke out following the establishment of Aelia Capitolina on the ruins of Jerusalem and not versa, the geographical limits of the rebellion, and much more. In general, the coins provide a good picture of the political, economic, and social circumstances of the rebellion. Now, the finding Bar Kokhba coins is rare for archaeologists. In my excavations in Chorvat Tashtun and Chorvat Mutzav in Modin, we did find Bar Kokhba coins. Finding a hoard of Bar Kokhba coins is very rare, and especially the silver Sla'im or tetradrachmas. This is a photo from Me'arat Teomim cave in the area of Beit Shemesh, where an expedition led by Boaz Yiso found a number of hoards. These Bar Kokhba coins that you see here, even when they're dirty in the cave, you can see the facade of the temple and the Arbat Aminim, the 4 species. And here's that same hoard after cleaning. And like I said before, there's much information that can be learned about the rebellion from the coins. I would like to go beyond the political or military history that could be learned from the discovery of the coins and delve into the ideology of the rebellion by studying the types or the symbols minted on the coins. I will be focusing on the types related to the temple and its cult. The 2 main questions that I will discuss are, what was the rebellion's leadership's purpose for exhibiting these types? And what was their meaning to the Jewish rebels who used the coins? Most of the scholars who wrote about the purpose of exhibiting these types came to the conclusion that the purpose was propaganda. Paul Romanoff wrote, "The aim of the revolt was expressly represented in the types and symbols on the coins of that period. They were to familiarize the people with the ultimate goal of Bar Kokhba and his followers, the restoration of the temple and ritual. In this respect, the coins could be characterized as propaganda coins, to stir the imagination and sentiment of the people in the war against Rome, to free Judea, and to reestablish the temple." Leo Mildenberg also wrote that the reason for the Bar Kokhba coinage was state proclamation and propaganda, and he showed how the language, script, wording, and types all boldly proclaimed a political and cultural renaissance of the Jewish state. It's important to keep in mind that in antiquity, coinage was the main communication medium and one of the best means of propaganda. Remember, they didn't have newspapers or radio or TV where they could send their messages to the people, and one of the best ways to do it was through coins. And that's why the Greek and later Roman emperors would mint many series of coins, each time with a different message, and the coins would be used in payment from hand to hand, and that message was spread through the coins. And here's one of the classical examples for that. The coins minted by Brutus following the assassination of Julius Caesar are a classic example for this fact. Cassius Dio wrote that following the assassination of Julius Caesar, on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, Brutus minted coins with his likeness on the obverse, that's the front of the coin, and a pileus, hat worn by freed slaves, between two daggers on the reverse. That's what you see here. This was propaganda, that by assassinating Caesar, they had liberated Rome. The Bar Kokhba coinage was extraordinary because it was not minted on original flans, that's the raw material of the coins. Rather, it was overstruck on Roman silver and bronze coins that were pulled out of circulation. Doing so, they hammered out the faces of the Roman emperors, Vespasian, Titus, Trajan, or Hadrian, and minted above them Jewish types, for example, the facade of the temple, and their war slogans, for example, for the freedom of Jerusalem. This audacity intensified the propaganda of the coins. And here's one nice example of that, where you can see the face of the Roman emperor, pretty sure Vespasian, and on top of it, the bundle of grapes, which was one of the symbols of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Although many scholars wrote that the purpose for exhibiting these types was propaganda, the interpretations they gave for the specific types cannot have served this purpose. Some scholars have interpreted them as common Jewish art symbols, such as we find in synagogue art, and mosaics, interpretations that lack any message for the rebellion. Others have interpreted them based on their symbolic or allegoric meaning in later rabbinic literature, meanings which probably were not known to the Jewish rebels at the time. Both types of interpretation could not have promoted the purpose of these types, propaganda. In this lecture, I will attempt to interpret the types, and just to clarify, the term types is the numismatic term for the symbols on the coins. I will attempt to interpret the types in relation to their direct meaning to the Jewish rebels who used them. In other words, when a Jew at the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion looked at these coins, what could the types have meant to him, and in what way did they influence him? The conclusion I reached was that all the types are related to experiences experienced by the pilgrims to the temple during the holidays, and in particular, Sukot. There is abundant historical and archaeological evidence that the phenomenon of pilgrimage, Aliyah Lרגל, was widespread, and it seems that the pilgrimage was the main expression of the connection between the temple and the public. We can safely assume that the experience of pilgrimage had a strong influence on the pilgrim and was etched into his memory. Although most of the people at the time of the rebellion did not see the temple in its splendor and never went on a pilgrimage, their parents or grandparents did. They then described their experiences to their children or grandchildren. These experiences became part of the collective memory of the nation. When the leadership of the Bar Kokhba rebellion wanted to bring up the memory of the temple in order to spur the nation to join the rebellion and break free from Rome, they used the experience that connected the nation to the temple, pilgrimage. Okay, let's start analyzing the coins, and we'll start with the tetradrachma or the sela. That's 4 drachma, 4 dinar, a large silver coin, very rare to find, a beautiful coin. And let's see what we can see. On the obverse, that's the front. We can see a building with 4 columns, right? You see them here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Bases and capitals. The columns are standing on a base, you see over here. And above them is an architrav. In the center, between the columns, there's an object, that's what we see over here, which stands on legs, right? And has an arch top, 2 lines inside and 2 dots between them. What is the building and what is the object? Although it seems obvious that the building is the temple that stood in Jerusalem, in the past 150 years, there have been many scholars who thought otherwise. For example, Hill came to the conclusion that we're looking at the Mishkan, the tabernacle that was built by Moses in the desert. Josephus describes the tabernacle as having 4 columns. There are various problems with this interpretation. In my opinion, the greatest problem is the question of the purpose. If it's true that the coins were used as propaganda, they were supposed to have a message for the rebels. The question arises, why would they have exhibited on their coins a tabernacle, a structure from their ancient history, and not the temple that stood in Jerusalem 60 years ago? What message would that have had for the rebels? Other scholars concluded that we're looking at the facade of a synagogue, and the object between the columns is a Torah shrine. The dots are Torah scrolls, which somehow are hanging in midair. This interpretation also has its issues, but once again, we have to ask, what was the purpose? The synagogue became a central institution in Jewish life, first in the diaspora, and only after in Judea, mainly after the destruction of the temple. These rebels were fighting and dying to change the current situation and to return to the glorious era of the temple. There's not seem to be any reason for them to display a synagogue and a Torah shrine on their coins. The most popular opinion is that the building in the coin is the temple that stood in Jerusalem. Some scholars believed it to be an accurate representation, and they attempted to reconstruct various details of the temple based on the coin. Others believed it to be a schematic representation. In regards to the object in the center and between the columns, the popular opinion is that it's the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron HaBrit. Mildenberg brought numerous parallels to prove that it's the Ark. For example, the wall painting from the synagogue at Dura Europos. That's is or was, I don't know what its situation is now, a beautiful synagogue in late Roman Byzantine synagogue in the 4th century in Syria now. And it has wall paintings of many scenes from the Bible, many biblical scenes. And over here, we're looking at the scene of when the Aron HaBrit, the Ark, was returned by the Philistines. And you see the Aron on a wagon, and you can see the similarity in between the shape and the dots and the lines between the Aron over here and the symbol and the object in between the columns, in between the temple. Dan Barag asked 2 questions on this interpretation. The first, the object on the coin has legs, right? You see the legs, the feet. It's not a box. The descriptions of the ark in the Bible make no mention of legs. It was in essence a box. Moreover, during the Second Temple period, the ark was no longer in existence. Therefore, this would have had to be an imaginary representation, as opposed to a scene that people actually saw. In order to identify the object on the coin, Barag analyzed an additional coin, the didrachma or the shekel. It's a really rare coin. Mildenberg published one that was purchased in Jerusalem in 1985, and Barag brought information of an additional coin that was described in 1913. But this is really the only photograph of one, possibly 2 coins, but it's authentic. On the obverse, you can see a representation of the temple with 2 columns and an object that looks like a table viewed on its long side with raised ends, right? That's the temple and what looks like a table. Mildenberg interpreted the object as the Ark of the Covenant when it was open. Somewhat of a strange interpretation, right? We don't know anything about the Ark when it was open. It was never supposed to be open. Barag said quite logically that the only table we know of in the temple is the table of the showbread, the Shulchan Lechem HaPanim. And it seems that that is the object displayed between the columns of the temple on the Bar Kokhba didrachma. A table in the temple is the Shulchan Lechem HaPanim, the table of the showbread. A similar representation of the table, dated to the Second Temple period, was found incised on plaster in a home excavated in what is known as the Herodian Quarter in the old city of Jerusalem, in the Jewish quarter, where if it wouldn't be for Corona, you could visit a beautiful museum. There too, so you have, this is incised on plaster and reconstruction, and you can see here the menorah from the time of the temple, and next to it, the table. You can see the table with its narrow sides elevated. The raised ends possibly serve to prevent the stacked loaves from falling off. If it is the table depicted on the didrachma, it would seem that the object between the columns on the tetradrachma is also the table, showed from its narrow side with its raised and arched ends. So if here we have the table seen from the long side, over here we would have the same table, but seen from the narrow side. And this is a illustration that Barag prepared in his article, where you can see different views of the same object, the Shulchan Aruch Panim, and how they were drawn on the coins of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Okay, now that we established that what we see on the coins is the facade of the temple and the showbread table, the question arises, what is the significance of that representation? What was its message? Remember that normally the table was inside the Heichal, the sanctuary, hidden from the eyes of the public. I would like to suggest that the coin displays a representation of a scene that was viewed by the pilgrims to the temple during the festivals. Numerous sources describe a custom where priests would take the table and other vessels out of the sanctuary and show them to the pilgrims during the festivals in order to impress them with the beauty of these vessels. Let's see some of those interesting sources. It seems to be, there's someone drawing on the screen. Okay. It seems to be hinted to in the Mishnah Chagiga. I'll read in Hebrew, then in English. כיצד מעבירים על טהרת הזרע, מטבילים את הכלים שיהיו במקדש, ואומרים להם, היזהרו, שמא תיגעו בשולחן ובמנורה. It's a little bit of an enigmatic Mishnah, but the understanding is that that's a quote of what the priests would say to the pilgrims when they visited the temple. They would tell them, be careful not to touch the table and render it unclean. So that hints that they would present the table and other vessels to the pilgrims during the festivals. It's stated explicitly in the Talmud, both in the Yerushalmi and in the Bavli. For example, in the Yerushalmi, it says, why is the table unclean at the end of the festival? Is it not because they would take it out and exhibit it to the pilgrims? Those are all sources after the destruction of the temple, but there is a source also from the time of the temple, from the Qumran scrolls, from the temple scroll, column 3, and you see it over here. And this is an interpretation of Israel Knoll, and I brought the reference below, but you can see the quote, the line over here, מזבח הקטורת הסמים ואת השולחן לא ימוש מן המקדש. So that's actually the writers of the scroll. That's their opposition to the custom of removing the table from the sanctuary and the festivals and showing it to the pilgrims. An additional source is from Papyrus Aksarianchos 840. That's a additional gospel that was found in Egypt on papyrus, and it has this fascinating description, which also hints to it. I'll read it. And he, Jesus, took them and brought them into the pure place and was walking inside the temple. And one Pharisee, a high priest named Levi, approached them and said to Jesus, the Savior, who allowed you to walk in the pure place and to see these holy vessels when thou hast now washed, nor yet have thy disciples bathed their feet, but defiled thou hast entered into this temple, which is a pure place, etc. And he also says again that neither does he venture to see these holy vessels. And also in his response, he says, and looked upon these holy vessels. So you have numerous mentions that he would one of the highlights of the pilgrimage to the temple would be to see the vessels which were taken out of their normal place and presented to the pilgrims. So it seems that this experience was one of the highlights of the pilgrimage to the temple, an experience that would be etched into the memory of the pilgrim. And when a father would tell over the story of his pilgrimage to his son or daughter, he would describe to them the experience of seeing the facade of the temple and the table of the showbread. Therefore, that scene was chosen by the leadership of the rebellion to be exhibited on the obverse of the tetradrachmas and didrachmas in order to arouse the memories of the temple and motivate the nation to join the rebellion. See, that they would look possibly, this is all theory, but they would be looking at the coin and remember that story that their grandparents or parents would tell them of how they would visit the temple on the pilgrimage and see the columns of the temple, of the sanctuary, and in front of them, the table of the showbread. So that's the front, the obverse. Let's flip the coin and look at the reverse. We all can identify what we see over here. On the reverse of the tetradrachma, we can see the Arbat Minim, the 4 species, Alulav, palm frond, the etrog, the citron. The lulav is bound together with one hadas and one arava, myrtle branch and willow branch. And on the didrachma, we see the lulav bundle, but without the etrog. It's clear that these types are related to the commandment to take these 4 species on the Festival of Sukot. I would like to stress their relation to the temple and the pilgrimage. Although currently, the tradition is to take the 4 species on the Festival of Sukot wherever you may be, right? Anywhere in Israel or in the diaspora. That was not the case in the Second Temple period, right? In Vayikra, in Leviticus 23:40, it has the commandment, the mitzvah of taking the 4 species. ולקחתם לכם ביום הראשון, פרי עץ אדם, כפות תמרים, ענף עץ אבות, ערבי נחל, ושמחתם לפני השם אלוקיכם 7 ימים. Right? And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. So not normally, the words before the Lord in the Bible are generally understood to mean in the temple. There's the discussion whether people in the Second Temple period would take the 4 species outside of the temple. The sources from the Second Temple period imply that they did not. And that's, let's say, for example, Josephus, right? From the Second Temple period, he describes the holiday of Sukot. And then he says how they would go up to the temple, right? And whenever they have come upon the lands of the fathers, arriving at the city that because of the temple they will have as a metropolis, they should celebrate a festival for 8 days, and at the time offer whole burnt offerings and sacrifices of thanksgiving to God, bearing in their hands a bouquet made up of the myrtle and willow branch together with the branch of palm with the fruit of, he's referring to the etrog. So he clearly puts the Arbat Minim, the 4 species, together with going into the temple. There are other sources for it as well. 1 second. Okay. The rabbinic sources imply that people would, at least on the first day. Even if some people did take the 4 species outside the temple, it was very different from how it was done inside the temple. By combining a number of sources, you can learn that in the temple, they would take the lulav as a festive procession. The priests, together with all the pilgrims, would hold their lulav and etrog and walk together around the altar. The procession was accompanied with the singing of Hallel and prayer proclamations. While walking around the altar, they would enter between the portico and the altar, Ben Ulam La Mizbeach, an area that all year round only priests would enter. It seems that this procession was also one of the highlights of the pilgrimage, an experience that left an impression on the pilgrim, an experience that he would describe to his children. In my opinion, that is the reason why the lulav and etrog were chosen to be exhibited on the coins, in order to remind the Jews of the experience during the pilgrimage, thereby reconnecting him or her to the temple and the goals of the rebellion. This is a quote that is brought in a number of sources from the Yerushalmi, even though in our current text of Yerushalmi, it's not found, but I'll quote it nonetheless. Ketzad seder hakafa, how would they surround the altar? Kol Yisrael gdolim v'ktanim, all of the Jews, adults and children, notlim et lulavehem b'yedehem yamanit, they hold their lulav in the right hand, v'etrogehem b'yedehem asmalit, u'mikifin hakafa achat, and they'd walk around the altar. And on the 7th day of Sukkot, they'd go around 7 times. There's also a source from the time of the temple, from the book of Jubilees, which describes Abraham taking the Arbat Minim, and how would we do it? And Abraham took branches of the palm tree and the fruit of the goodly trees, and every day going around the altar with the branches 7 times a day in the morning. He praised and gave thanks to his God for all things in joy. So it's a, some fantastic description about Abraham, but he's describing how they would take the 4 species in his time, which is hold them and walk around the altar. Okay. I'm going to continue to other coins, the coins with the musical instruments. Many of the Bar Kokhba coins exhibit musical instruments. What you can see here are 3 silver dinarai from the 2nd year of the rebellion. The upper instrument is a lyre, the middle is a harp, and on the bottom a pair of trumpets. What was the meaning of these symbols, the types? There are many sources which describe how song and music were an integral part of the worship in the temple, and they most probably left an impression on whoever came to the temple. When the pilgrims came on the festivals, the experience intensified, and the offering of the sacrifices was accompanied by the music of flutes, harps, lyres, and the Levites, the Leviim, singing Hallel. At various intervals in the ceremonies, the priests would sound the trumpets. Regarding the Festival of Sukot in particular, there are descriptions of the festive ceremonies which included playing the music of these instruments. The peak of the festivities on that festival was during the nights at the Beit HaShoeva celebration, which was described in the Mishnah. And here you see it, also sources from the time of the temple, like Nensira, but also in the Mishnah. I guess I'll read it in English, as the lecture is in English. They said, anyone who has not seen the rejoicing of the Beit HaShoeva in his life has never seen rejoicing. The pious men and wonder workers would dance before them with flaming torches in their hand, and they would sing before them songs and praises, and the Levites, beyond counting, played on harps, lyres, cymbals, trumpets, and other musical instruments. So here too, it seems that the most basic and direct meaning that the rebels could have gleaned from the musical instruments displayed in the coins was that they represent the musical instruments that were played in the temple. Their purpose was to bring up the memory of the festive pilgrimage to the temple, which included playing of these instruments. And that way, the rebellion's leadership hoped to connect them to the temple and give them the hope to continue to fight the Romans. Alicia, before you continue, should we put in some questions maybe?
There's only one question that was asked. It was a general question from the beginning of the lecture. They wrote in Hebrew, but the question is, האם לפי מיקומם של המטבעות שנמצאו, אפשר לקבוע שבר כוכבא כבש או לא כבש את עיליה קפיטולינה? I guess, if I understood correctly, can you conclude based on where the coins were found if Bar Kokhba captured Ilya Capitolina?
Okay, that's, I'll take, really it's a break in what we're discussing. It's a general question, but I'll just answer it because that's one thing that has been discussed by the scholars and researchers of the Bar Kokhba revolt. There are very, very few Bar Kokhba coins found in Jerusalem. In the past, I don't remember the numbers, but I would say less than 5. There's recently has been found, which the IEA publicized, I think, in an excavation of One Khajbi, where they found it. Based on those small numbers, in my opinion, it's not enough to prove that they reconquered Ilya Capitolina, but there are other scholars who think otherwise. Like I said, I don't think so, but there are those who think otherwise. All right. All right, let's continue. Okay. Many of the silver denarii of all 3 years display a jug. Right, that's what you see here, and a branch. The jug has a thin neck, right, and a fluted body, and stands on a thin foot. At the top of the neck, it has a broad rim with a spout on one side and a handle on the other. Judging from the shape of the vessel, you can come to 2 conclusions. The jug was made from metal, right? It can't be pottery, and it was used for decanting. Many scholars identify the jug as the golden flagon, the tzluchit hazahav, used in the water libation ceremony that took place in the temple, once again during the Festival of Sukot. In this ceremony, water was drawn from the pool of Siloam in a golden flagon and was subsequently poured by a priest onto the altar in the inner court of the temple. The Mishnah vividly describes the water libation ceremony as a public festive event. Let's bring some of those sources. Here we have them in Hebrew, but so we'll bring them in English. And the description of the water libation ceremony. The water libation now, so a golden flask holding 3 loaves in volume, did one fill with the water from Siloam, from Bechat Shiloach. When they reached the water gate, they blowed a sustained tkiah, Tuan Tkiah from the shofar. So it's a public festive event, and it's actually somehow connected to the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Once again, it seems that the golden flagon was displayed on the Bar Kokhba coins as a representation of the water libation ceremony, an event experienced by the pilgrims to the temple on the Festival of Sukot, an experience that left an impression, and its memory could have connected the people to the temple and to the goals of the rebellion. So that's in regards to the jug, the flagon. What about the branch? What's the branch? Until 2008, the branch to the right of the flagon was identified as a palm frond, kaf tamal, or lulav. used during Sukot as part of the four species, the Arbat Minim. According to Romanoff, the two symbols complement each other, being that they were both used in the festival of Sukot. Jonathan Adler pointed out that beyond the fact that both ceremonies are done on that festival, they take place on that festival, there's no real association between the water libation ceremony and the four species ritual. Adler also questioned the identification of the branch as a palm frond. If you compare it to Bar Kokhba coins that clearly exhibit a palm frond, you can see the difference. The individual leaflets on the palm frond are longer and closer together than on the flagon type. Let's see if I made here. There you see. So if that's a palm frond, that's clearly a kaf tamal. This is not. The leaves are smaller, shorter, and they're more closely together. So what is it? Adler suggested to identify the branch as a willow branch, the arava, which was used in a ceremony in the temple on the festival of Sukot in close conjunction with the water libation ceremony. The willow branch ceremony is described in the Mishnah. No, that's something else. Right, and that's how it's described. What was the right of the willow branch? There was a place below Jerusalem called Motza. They went down to there and collected young willow branches and then came and set them upright along the sides of the altar with their tops bent over the top of the altar. They would pick long willow branches and stand them up all around the altar on the seventh day of Sukkot. Then they sounded a prolonged trumpet blast, a quavering note, and a prolonged blast. Every day they walk around the altar one time, right, and say Ana Shmoshiana, and that day they would walk around the altar 7 times. Once again, this was an impressive ceremony that took place during the pilgrimage to the temple on the festival of Sukot. We can assume that partaking in the ceremony was an influential experience, one that would leave a memory, and that seems to be the reason that it was chosen to be represented on the coins of the rebellion. Based on what I explained until now, many of the types on the Bar Kokhba coins are related to the festival of Sukot. Besides its representation on the coins of the rebellion, the celebration of the festival by the rebels is recorded in the epigraphic finds from the rebellion. 2 of the letters sent from the administration of the Bar Kokhba discuss supplying the 4 species for the rebels during the war. That's a tremendous percentage, 2 of relatively few letters that discuss Al-Bat Minim and the festival of Sukkot. The question arises, what special significance did the festival of Sukkot have for the rebels? Previously, there have been a number of suggestions to answer this question. One possibility suggested is that the traditional date of the dedication of the temple was Sukkot. The Bible describes how both the first and second temples were dedicated on Sukkot. Therefore, this festival was very important to the rebels who wanted to rededicate the temple. An alternative explanation is that the festival of Sukkot is related to eschatological descriptions. For example, in Zechariah 14, you can read how in the future, Jerusalem will be a place where all those left from among all the Gentiles will go up every year to bow before the King, the Lord of hosts, and celebrate the festival of Sukkot. So it has to do with Acharit Yamim, the end of the days. Based on this, Chaim Lapin suggested that it's possible that by celebrating this festival, the Bar Kokhba and his followers were celebrating more than the turning of the year, they were celebrating the turning of the age. A third possibility suggested is that the carrying of the 4 species symbolizes victory, and the message of the rebels was clear. They were telling each other, we will be victorious over the Romans. Now, there are many sources from which you can learn that carrying a palm branch symbolized victory. It was a very common symbolism in the Hellenistic world, and many of the Hellenistic kings and Roman emperors are depicted on their coins carrying a palm frond. An example for this, very close to the Bar Kokhba rebellion, is Hadrian's coin, which commemorated his visit to Judea in the year 129-130 CE, the coin that you see on the slide. On these coins, Judea is depicted as a woman greeting Hadrian together with 3 children, see them over here, carrying palm branches, a symbolism of the docility of Judea. Bar Kokhba himself used the same symbolism to claim his victory over Rome. On the small bronze coins and in some of the silver dinarim, you can see a palm branch with open leaves, which was clearly a symbol of victory. That's that coin over here. However, this is a different depiction from the 4 species that appear on the tetradrachma. There's only one source that claims that carrying the 4 species on the Festival of Sukot symbolizes victory. And that's a relatively late midrash in Tilim on Psalm 17 that scholars who support this interpretation quote. That's the midrash that you see here. It's a beautiful midrash. I guess I'll read it in Hebrew because it is a very nice midrash. מהו מימות בימינך נצח? כמי שהוא נוטל לולב בימין ונוצח ובעין. בנוהג שבעולם, הנדסים רצים באיפורקוס, that's a hippodrome, מי נוטל ובא, מישהו נוצח. Right, that's just translated. In thy right hand, there are pleasures of victory. It says that just like when the charioteers race in the hippodrome, the victor carries a palm frond, so too the children of Israel, here, כך בראש השנה באים כל באו לעולם ועוברים לפניו כבני מרון. In Rosh Hashanah, we were all judged. ואף ישראל עוברים לפניו עם כל באו לעולם, all the world and also Israel. ושרי אומות העולם אומרים, אנו ניצחנו וזכינו בדין. And the שרים of the world say, we won. And the Jews say, we won. ואין אדם יודע מי ניצח. And people don't know who won. אם ישראל נוצחין אומות העולם. עבר ראש השנה וכל ישראל באים ביום הכיפורים ומתענים בו. לובשים בגדים לבנים ונעים. עבר יום כיפורים ואין אדם יודע מי נוצח עם ישראל ומאומות העולם. We pass through Yom Kippur, everyone wears white clothing, but we still don't know who won the judgment. כיוון שהגיע יום טוב הראשון של חג, once the first day of Sukot, כל ישראל גדולים וקטנים, נותנים לולביהם בימינים, and all of Israel, old and young, hold their lulav in the right hand, and their torah in their left hand, מיד הכל יודעים שישראל נוצרים בדין. That's how everyone knows that Israel won in the judgment. And he continues. But that there you see a midrash where it's clear that the holding of the 4 species of the Bat Minim is a symbol of victory. However, that may be the case, but to me it seems that the most direct significance that the Festival of Sukot would have had for the rebels is of the time when their ancestors went on a pilgrimage to the temple. From the various descriptions quoted previously, it seems that the Festival of Sukot was the most exciting pilgrimage, and the pilgrims would witness and partake in the festive ceremonies of this festival. Therefore, when the rebellion's leadership wanted to arouse the memory of the temple, it's logical that they would use symbols of the Festival of Sukot. It's possible that this is also the reason why it was so important for Shimon Bar Kokhba that his soldiers would have the 4 species during the war. I mean, even if other people in Judea didn't have the 4 species, I would say that the rebels of Shimon Bar Kokhba did have them. Not merely as a religious commandment, but as a reenactment of one of the festive ceremonies that was done in the temple on the Festival of Sukot, and in that way to motivate his soldiers to fight the Romans. To summarize, and this is the end. In this lecture, I discussed the temple and cult types of the Bar Kokhba coinage. I suggest that these types are representations of the experiences experienced by the pilgrims to the temple during the festivals. And he showed that the purpose in displaying these types was to influence, it was propaganda, to arouse the memory of the temple and motivate the nation in the impossible war against Rome. The best way to do that was by displaying types related to the pilgrimage, and specifically on Sukkot, because the pilgrimage was the connection that the public had with the temple. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Avraham, very much. Thank you. It was very nice. Someone had asked if the lecture is going to be, if you're planning to publish it as a article. Is it going to be published, and if they could get some more information about the sources that you spoke about.
The lecture is published as an article, in Hebrew, in the journal Chidushim Becheker Yerushalayim, New Studies of Jerusalem, and you can find it online on my academia page. And if anyone wants to, I guess, somehow get their email, I could also send it to them. There's also an English version of it, but it hasn't come out yet.
Thank you.
All right.
That's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Okay. חג שמח.
חג שמח.
תודה רבה לכולם, חג שמח.